Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Cynthia Schneider. I'm a professor of diplomacy at Georgetown University, actually in Washington, D.C., and here in Doha. And I co-direct a number of projects that put my ideas about the importance of culture in diplomacy into action in Mali, and also an interdisciplinary project at Georgetown. I'm going to introduce the panelists just by their title before they speak, before I ask them questions. So if I haven't forgotten you if I don't do it right away, but I'm going to try to save time by not doing it now. I'm going to begin with a few kind of overarching ideas for you all to think about, and then we'll proceed with questions for the panelists. And I do want to encourage the panelists, even though we're kind of far apart like this, please engage with each other, remember, as much as in response to me. So here's some thoughts just for you to think about during the session. My hope for this session is that it will maybe change a little bit the ideas you might have about the role of culture in international affairs and diplomacy. Of course, you're here, so you probably think it's pretty important, but I hope at the end of this session you're going to think it's really important. So, to begin, just a few thoughts. Number one, politics and culture tell different stories. Think about what you know about a country, what you think about a country, and then think about how that might change if you looked at that country through its culture rather than through its politics. A subset of that, this is something I'm quoting the great Nigerian playwright Wole Soyinka. Politics demonizes, culture humanizes. I think we can all agree we have plenty of demonization in the world now, and wouldn't it be great to have a little more humanization? And placing more of an emphasis on culture might be a way to get there. Now, there are people who take culture seriously, and those, I'm sorry to say, are not exclusively, but primarily extremists and authoritarians. They understand the power of culture to shape identity. And so very often they ban it or they destroy it because they want to shape identity. And so they destroy what gets in the way. And what I'm hoping we'll have more of is a recognition of this power and strength of culture by forces for good. And finally, that culture has tremendous potential for development. And this is something we'll look at in a number of different contexts. So I'm now going to begin with questions to the panelists. And I'm hoping we'll be able to give you all then an opportunity to ask questions, but I have to tell you, this is a challenge because we have such interesting, great panelists and so little time. So we're all going to talk fast and we'll see where we land. I want to begin by asking one question to three people. Razi Ahmed, raise your hand so they know who you are. Razi is the founder of the Lahore Literary Festival and also the chair of the Alhamra Arts Council. Dr. Andreas Gürgen, who is the Secretary General of the German Federal Ministry for Culture and Media, and Gayana Umerova, who is the chairperson of the Art and Culture Foundation of Uzbekistan. All three of you have spoken to me and with the group about how culture in your different contexts can serve as a bridge across differences in your country, across differences of class, of ethnic group, of generations. I'd love for you, and different nationalities and backgrounds, I'd love for each of you to talk about how that operates in each of your countries and environments. Guyana, why don't you start? And I'm afraid I'm only going to give you 3 minutes apiece.
Thank you very much. Well, basically, in Uzbekistan, culture is playing the central role, and our country is very rich in historical tapestry and also diverse in population. So this is basically the answer to your question. Because the culture is so diverse, we have to find this kind of interface and international dialogue, in our country. This is why our government is really playing an important role. And we used to be the center point for the crossroads. So we know that the dialogue in culture, this has a very special meaning. We're a country of dialogue and negotiations. And especially our foundation is publicly funded. It's a state foundation, and our role is to give the culture to everyone and to make it available and accessible to everyone.
Thank you, Guyana. At least for me, I don't know about all of you, and we'll explore this more. I was not aware the degree to which the Uzbek government is really putting culture forward, so we'll hear more about that. Razi, tell us a little bit about how culture operates across difference in Pakistan, please.
Sure. First of all, I'm delighted to be here at Doha Forum, and I'm honored to be sitting among such luminaries. Pakistan is a complex, diverse country. It's the 5th most populous country. We have an old civilization dating back 2500 BC, the cities of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. Its history doesn't start from 1947. It's got composite cultures and multiple identities. And how do we mediate these identities and multiple pasts? It's through the power of culture. While we are unfortunately a developing country, we have a long way to catch up with other countries, especially in the region. But there are intermittent efforts underway to use the power of culture for bringing people together as an equalizer, for promoting greater social harmony. We have cities like Karachi, for instance. It's one of the most complex megapolises in the world. How do you deal with ethnic warfare? You really bring out the power of culture through concerts, through what we have in our Urdu tradition, mushairas, which are poetry recitals. These are not limited to the 4 walls. They're held out in the open so that they're open, free, and accessible for all. And I think really through those events, we've been able to keep Pakistan afloat with all the challenges that we have of our geography. Culture internally has kept the country together, and it really brings out the best from amongst us. I feel that an instance of this is Manzar, the art and architecture exhibition that is taking place currently at the Qatar National Museum. And we have its curator here sitting in the audience, Caroline Hancock. It's for the first time in the history of Pakistan since 1947 that a comprehensive kaleidoscope of an exhibition is taking place, spanning all these decades, covering art and architecture. The Prime Minister of Pakistan was here for that, and the message has been sent across to the rank and file, to the bureaucracy, to the people of Pakistan that this is your identity, embrace it, celebrate it. And this is something that we should value in terms of its aesthetics and harness and hone a lot more of. Alongside, I would say there's another interesting project that over the past decade has fired the imagination of many from the standpoint of Coke Studio, which is sponsored by the Coca-Cola company. This is a project that has brought out the best of Pakistan's indigenous music traditions from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan and Gilgit-Baltistan, as well as the modern cities. So merging sort of classical with the contemporary beats has been a boon. It's brought out that feel-good vibe, which is otherwise hard to foster. And I think really these are 2 instances, I would say, of how internally and externally our culture can bridge the gaps that there are of knowledge, of how we misperceive each other, and how others, perhaps because of the foreign news cycle, Pakistan is often misperceived as well. So really, I do firmly believe in the power of culture, and I feel that if Pakistan is on its present wavelength, we could be a juggernaut.
Thank you, Razi. And you were modest enough not to mention actually the role of the literary festival in Lahore in also bridging these differences in education and class. And you told me that when the Lahore Literary Festival comes to New York, you've had cab drivers who have been so excited to hear about it and ready to go to the Asia Society, not necessarily the normal visitors to the Asia Society to see it. And another way that Coke Studio kind of bridges gaps, just so you all understand if you're not familiar with it, Coke Studio stands for Coca-Cola. So in every one of these wildly popular episodes where contemporary pop musicians are filmed recording together with traditional musicians, you have a big Coca-Cola bottle. And it's very clear who's sponsoring this. And, you know, Pakistan is not known as being a country that necessarily loves the United States, but it's something for everyone to think of when you're trying to engage with another country. This is a Coca-Cola initiative, not the US government. Give people something they want and need on their terms, which is what Coke Studio does, and you'll be appreciated. Andreas, I'd like to turn to you now, and can you give us a sense of how, really under your direction now, culture works in Germany to bridge some differences in your country?
Oh, well, let me start with a slight contradiction. I do not necessarily think that culture and politics tell different stories. So just to give two reasons for it. One reason is more theoretical. When we think that culture is separated from the, in brackets, ugly face of politics or economics, we are quite close to Karl Marx. And we could learn the lesson from Gramsci that there are metapolitics. So the narrative told in culture has influence on politics and has influence on the economic sector and vice versa. So there is no pure humanity sector called culture, and the rest is the ugly basis of a society we have to deal with, and then once we are exhausted, we go into a cinema and we come back and we see humanity. It's a bit more complex. Second reason why I'm a bit more skeptical is I'm German. Our culture did not prevent us of being a national socialist Germany, killing 6 million Jews, bringing war all over the world. So we had a wonderful culture in the 20s that did not prevent us of being in a contradiction to the sounding base of humanity. So that is a very personal, historical issue I have with that view on culture. But perhaps it's even true for all the Western countries. Our culture did not prevent us of being racist or anti-Semite or whatever. And Khalid shared a wonderful experience with me a couple of time ago at the Documenta in Kassel. We had wonderful conversations about that. So there are issues in culture which are directly linked to politics. Second remark, it's with a reference to Iqbal, just to pay honor to Pakistan. So from Iqbal, we can learn that there is a view on humanity which is non-materialist and non-separated from the spiritual aspects each and every human has. So to this extent, I totally agree what you're saying, but this is art. This is staying silent in front of an artwork, be it a film, be it a song we listen to, be it a story be told. And this power of art might approach us to listen to the call for humanity which comes from somewhere. And this is why, and that's my last point, this is why it's so important to give access to arts, to give access for our people, and then building bridges to economically disfavored people, for socially disfavored people, but also for those who are not disfavored, who just need to be trained, need to get that access to art. And as a Ministry of Culture, we have created an app granting every 18-year-old boy and girl with 100 euros just for the fun. And they only can buy art with it, be it a book, be it a song, be going to the concert, going to the theater, but experiencing humanity in a community of other human beings in front of an artwork. So that is perhaps the bridge we can build. And there's another bridge, and that bridge is to our international partners. There is no nation state which might solve any of the issues of the 21st century on the basis of a nation state. So international cooperation is pivotal for any nation. And we have to show that openness to the stories, to the bodies, to the tales, to the songs of other nations, and to welcome it.
Well, thank you, Andreas. And of course, what do artists or people associated with art do? They often criticize, stand up to hold a mirror to authority. So I'm thrilled that my panelists are disagreeing with me as the alleged authority on this stage. And I'm going to then just clarify, I certainly didn't mean anything so elevated as what you were talking about in terms of theory. I'm completely unburdened by any theoretical knowledge in this area. I meant something much simpler, that I'll give you the example of the Arab Spring. All of the policymakers, at least in Washington, were very surprised when the Arab Spring broke out. Now, they knew that these countries were ruled by brutal dictators. We have very intelligent foreign service officers. They knew this. But those dictators have been in power for 30 years. So what reason might there have been to think there would be some kind of eruption? I will contrast that perception with what people thought who were familiar with the art coming, not just visual arts, but the blogging, the hip hop, the film, even the most popular book from Egypt, the Yacubian Building, translated into like 30 languages. That is a roadmap for why the Egyptian revolution took place. It was published in 2007. It was Egypt's entry into the Academy Awards. Anyone who was familiar with those creative outputs from those countries would say, why hasn't there been a revolution? Where is this revolution? And so when it came, people familiar with the art and the artists weren't so surprised. And so my point is just that creative expression coming out of a country gives you a window into what people are thinking in that country, which the politics doesn't give you. And I won't say anything about Germany, but I would say in general, with I'm sure a few great exceptions. I saw Robin right here earlier. She's a great exception. But in my country in general, we tend to view, which is the United States, view countries through their politics. And that doesn't always represent what the people are thinking. So Gramsci aside, I'm sorry, that's all I meant. Now, Irina Bokova, what an honor to have you on this panel and to be able to see you again. I think many of you may know Irina from her extraordinary tenure as the Secretary General of UNESCO, and currently she is the chair of the board of the Democracy and Culture Foundation, as well as many, many, many other titles, of which if I gave them all, we'd be finished. Irina, I want to talk with you about culture and conflict in a slightly different situation. Really, culture as a key element in actual war-like conflict. You walked the streets of Timbuktu with President Francois Hollande just a couple of days after French-led forces had expelled the Al-Qaeda-linked extremists who had occupied the city of Timbuktu and the northern half of Mali. What were you, as the Secretary of General of UNESCO, doing there, and what role did culture play in that conflict? And feel free to expand it to others if you'd like.
Thank you very much, Cynthia, for this very generous presentation. Indeed, the debate resonates very deeply, of course, with my experience and with my thoughts, and there are so many different layers here in our debate. But you just brought me back to something very important, the link between culture, identity, heritage protection, tangible, intangible, conflict, reconciliation, resilience, healing, I would say, after a conflict. And the case of Mali, of course, is a very telling one. We did work with you also in Mali. But also, if I may come to your initial opening remarks, when you said that extremists know very well the power of culture. And this is where, when they attack identities, where they destroy heritage. We have seen what ISIL has done in Iraq, in Syria, with the destruction of very emblematic humanities heritage. They indeed attack diversity in our world. They know very well that they will hurt the identities of people in Mali. They will deprive them. When they destroyed the mausoleums of the saints in Timbuktu, they knew that they are going to hurt the local communities because, or burning the manuscripts there in Ahmed Baba library, because they know that this is something so deeply ingrained in their own history, of their families, of their communities, their identity, and that is why they were doing this deliberately. They knew what they were doing. It was not just collateral damage of a conflict, of a war. So this, it was very important indeed to pass this message, and I still think, and I'm very proud of it, that under the very strong encouragement of UNESCO at those times in 2017, for the first time ever, the Security Council adopted a resolution entirely dedicated to the link between peace, security, humanitarian concerns, and culture, and the protection of heritage, taking the example of Mali, Syria, Iraq, and some other cases. But you did mention that indeed I was walking in the streets of Timbuktu with the French president just a few days, and then I promised that we will reconstruct the mausoleums in Timbuktu. We did. I went 2 years later once again to inaugurate these reconstructed mausoleums. I met with the leaders of the local community, and I had the feeling that I have given them back their identity. It was such an emotion during this meeting that I have read, and I have traveled all around the world. I have visited many places, but I could hardly remember a more kind of an emotional meeting that I had with the local communities. And this was indeed my feeling. They regained, I gave them back their identity.
That is certainly exactly what people said to me in Timbuktu when I went to see these restored mausolea. And by the way, these are not like magnificent works of art like the architecture that you find in Uzbekistan. These are mud brick huts. You know,
Yeah,
you
they're
look
very
at them,
modest.
very modest.
built.
But that's not the point. It's what they hold, and they hold this history of scholar saints in Timbuktu, how much knowledge, and the knowledge of these people is prized. Indeed, the scholar Salamaud al-Hajj, and the sort of greatest living scholar of Timbuktu, told me when he saw the destruction happening, he didn't see it in person, he saw it on his television, he just burst into tears and was in complete despair. So you really are restoring people's identity. And think about it, how are people going to rebuild a society if they don't even have a sense of who they are? and it's a shared identity. So it brings people together and gives them the strength to rebuild.
If I may, just one small word, because you are bringing me back to this. Then it was the Security Council deployment of peacekeepers. For the first time again, in the mandate of the Security Council, peacekeepers of the United Nations, the protection of heritage was inscribed, then it was taken off, but I think for 3 years it stayed. And what was very interesting, again, speaking about culture and identities, the invisible, sometimes intangible heritage, which is about, we spoke about storytelling, which is about oral traditions, it is about the previous generation has given us as a legacy. And also, it was very interesting that within the peacekeeping forces, there was a small unit about intangible heritage in Mali. Isn't it a great story to tell about the power of culture?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for adding that. Khalid Albaih, last but absolutely not least, and perhaps well known to many of you here who are resident in Doha. Khalid is a Sudanese cartoonist, artist, writer, editor, and was the creator and curator of the recent exhibition at Mataf. But Khalid is originally from Sudan, and much of his art reflects that, as well as other conflicts and challenges around the world. Khalid, you have told me how you have really fought to persuade people, donors, government members, leaders in society, that culture belongs at the heart of conflict resolution, healing, moving forward as a society. And you've had some challenges doing that. Tell us a little bit about how you have worked towards that goal and what happened along the way.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be part of this. For me, it was because we come from a country that doesn't have culture, is in the structure of making of the government, and even though we're a country that's based on culture, right? Sudan is 6,000 years of history and our older history, and everyone, this is our everyday life, and our diversity is something that's really we didn't take advantage of, and this really made me understand the power of culture. And as you said, culture makes people familiar with each other. And this is the issue. What's known about Sudan, just like what's known about the region as a whole, when I say I'm from Sudan, people expect that there's going to be sad news right after I say that. Oh, we're in war right now, there's famine, there's this, there's that. But no one understands the history that comes from it, including Sudanese people. And I was born in Romania, I grew up here in Doha, and being in Doha, you're surrounded by a lot of nationalities all the time, and I grew up, in a class there's around 20 nationalities, and the stories, this was what made it so powerful for me, and what is known about us, this was really a question that came to mind. So for me, what I wanted was to create a narrative about Sudan from us, from Sudanese people. We talk about the positivity, we talk about the diversity, we talk about our history, and sadly, not a lot of people understood that, the power of that in Sudan, and because they didn't see it. And when you don't see something, you don't understand the value of it. When they don't go to museums, they don't understand museums, they don't see the value of it. We're living fine without it. And this was my issue. This was my issue with most people that I went and spoke to, is that they don't know. We are living fine without museums. And living here and being part of Qatar Museums and working in Qatar Museums, I saw what building culture step by step means, and giving that value means. And also working in Europe and seeing that there is a set structure for culture and how it's appreciated. What does that give it? So I spent most of the time trying to do that, and basically started from me trying to work on a book about the history of Sudan, done by artists. So it's an art book about the history of Sudan. And what I found problematic was I couldn't give them any examples. There weren't any art books. So I thought, okay, we need a library. We need an art library. So I worked with the Goethe Institute in Sudan, and we put together my books and their space, and we put together the first comic book library in Africa. And from there, I wanted to build a library because it's at the end of the day, it's supposed to go to the people. And from there, I asked the government at the time, after the revolution in 2019, to give me a space, and they're like, yeah, this is great, amazing. And then COVID happened. And then everything stopped for a year. And then again, I went back and I was trying to get funding, and I was trying to get to understand, and they said, all right, we can't give you the building anymore, but we can help you with other things. So I started going to funders, and again, I thought the same thing, like why do we need a library when there's no policy in place? We need healthcare, we need education, and they think of it as a separate thing. They don't think of it as a parallel thing. They don't think of culture as a human right. So I went to the only source that I think appreciated was the people. So through crowdsourcing, we made a competition. We tried to build a mobile library, and we had a winning design, which was a rickshaw that will go around Khartoum, and we have the same books that we had in Goethe Institute and more books, and people donated books to start doing that. And then a coup happened in Sudan. Everything stopped again. And we tried again to start with that, and everyone was like, oh, but there's the coup, there's no stability. And I was like, yes, exactly. This is when we need a library. This is when we need a gathering place, when there is no stability in the country. And when we started again, we built 4 amazing rickshaws, sustainable. I put a team together to start this whole thing, and then the war happened. So even, when I speak to my friends in Europe about this story, they're always like, oh, why don't you just build a library? Because they don't see how many things just happen, like COVID, a coup, a war, and people that don't even, a government that don't even appreciate it. So that's why I think it's very important to put the ground to understand culture. Yes, and it should be accessible for everyone. And this is basically what I still want to do. I still want to do this library now, even in refugee camps in Sudan, and for displaced Sudanese people, and also outside of Sudan.
Yeah, which is really all the more important. I think of what happened to so many Cambodians when they fled the country during the Khmer Rouge regime. And there were people who went to the refugee camps and tried to find the dancers who knew classical Cambodian dance and tried to start to revive it right there in the refugee camps, again, to give them some sense that they weren't, as the Khmer Rouge wanted them to be, at year 0, but that they had a connection to their cultural heritage. So important. Guyana, I'm going to come back to you because you were so kind as to actually speak for just 3 minutes. So I'm going to give you a little more time because it's not enough time for anyone. But I would love to hear you talk a little more about your government's policy, which is you are in a very elevated government role as well, implementing this policy, which is, as I understand it, a really concerted, deliberate policy really to put culture at the center of Uzbekistan's development now, both protecting the cultural heritage for future generations. And by the way, I would say, if you haven't been to Uzbekistan, I strongly encourage you to go. I took a fantastic trip there with my son last year. And you can tell maybe about the biennial, it'll be the perfect opportunity to go to Bukhara. But so preserving the cultural heritage, but also promoting contemporary and modern art as an economic vehicle to fuel economic development. So talk about that government policy, please.
Well, I will start by saying Uzbekistan is a landlocked country, and probably most of you know. So we get a lot of challenges. We're a country of huge population, considerably for the amount of land we have. Not enough oil, not enough gas, not enough gold. But we have a great resource people. We have 65% of a younger generation below 30, and we really see the huge potential in this. And we are really now realizing that investing in creative economy we can make much bigger changes, and can be a really great investment. Creating new jobs, for the younger generation, in order for them to receive probably their education in the West, but definitely come back because the infrastructure is ready for them to apply their knowledge and to make something grand for the country. We have a huge history. We are a country of really long past. We have a great city as Samarkand, Bukhara, Khiva, that a lot of tourists are visiting every year. But there is a need for the contemporary cultures. Correctly you say, we cannot always emphasize on being a historical center of the Central Asia. Of course, we have to move forward, and the government's really support is tremendous. We're building a museum with Tadawando, which hopefully to be executed in 2027, which is a new home for existing collection of avant-garde, modernist art, and we're still buying contemporary art. We're investing in Bukhara Biennial, which will be the first edition next year from September. I think this is also a great initiative because we are trying to interlink, the regions to bringing contemporary art to Uzbekistan that probably would never be interlinked because we was always stuck in kind of Central Asia or post-Soviet countries, And now this is a moment when we can link countries like Pakistan with Mexico, and bringing all of this beautiful art together and also making these changes. So we have a great amount of initiatives, but also all of these initiatives are really supporting, as I say, creative economy, but also bringing new professions. And this is very important for our society, because we are people who are a little bit conservative in their professions, like lawyers, doctors, engineers, but bringing really a new line, of creative people. That's quite important for our society. So, on the culture is really playing an important role.
Yeah, I think that's just very exciting to be following this really strong, two-pronged approach and really recognizing the power of culture both for economic growth and for social cohesion in the country. It's a very interesting example. I want to see if there's a way to allow a little bit of time for questions, but I want to first just in a kind of bullet round ask everyone to answer one question as sort of briefly as you can. We are not at a cultural forum here. We're at a primarily political forum or a multidisciplinary forum. So I want to ask each of you, starting with you, Irina, what would you like this multidisciplinary, perhaps more politically oriented audience to know about culture that they might not already know and its power?
Well, I believe because this forum is about first, it's about diplomacy, it's about diversity, and the specific title, it's innovation. And I think culture relates to all of this, I would say, important objectives of the Doha Forum. Culture and innovation, this is exactly where culture is. Innovation cannot happen without culture. But also many of the contemporary problems, I wouldn't say can be solved, but cultural diplomacy is conducive to creating a better conditions for them to be solved.
Thank you. Andreas?
When Thomas Sankara, who was an African revolutionary in the 80s, went to the United Nations, he held a speech about the hope he had for his country, which was Burkina Faso. And he ended his speech quoting Novalis, who is a German author from the beginning of the 19th century. So, and the idea was that in the literature, I'm joining you on the importance of literature. In the literature of Novalis, he found a description of his hope for a reconciled society. So my take would be read books.
Good. Guy, and I'm going to skip over you and go to Razi and Khalid, and come back to you, because you were just speaking.
Pakistan is adversely impacted by the ravages of climate change. We've seen flash flooding, multiple communities displaced, houses upended. How do we bring about the message around climate change? I mean, internally and also externally. There's a lot of donor fatigue. All these pledges that have been made at multiple fora have not come through. The way it can be brought about in terms of an impactful change would be through culture. If we were to share the stories of those displaced communities, of the voices that are at the hinterlands of the country, which are the worst impacted by climate change. There are musicians, there are artists, poets, activists, and craftsmen. You know, if you go to Hunza, one of the most beautiful valleys up north, not far from the China border, there are traditions that are one of a kind, part of the intangible heritage that Irina was talking about. So I really feel that people's stories can only be told through the powerful medium of culture. And Pakistan can achieve its foreign policy outcomes, can get dividends if it were to employ its soft power far more effectively.
Thank you for that. Khalid, I'm going to, you can go ahead and answer the question I asked, or I can tweak it a little bit and say if you would like to speak more about arts and culture as a witness, which is something you've addressed in multiple venues, feel free to do that.
I mean, I'm a political cartoonist originally, and I see my work as being a witness to everyday events. And when I go back to look at my work every day, it's basically what happened. You can read history through that, and this is art as a whole. And you know, before photography, it was paintings, and this is how we saw the world. This is how we knew. This is what happened. The news came to us through art, through painting, through books, and it actually circles back to the same question again. Is that, you know, people have a very concise idea about what is culture. And you know, art is in its own world, and this is not what we do. We do more policy, we do more important things, not realizing that, you know, the architecture is culture, the clothes you wear is culture, the community that you're trying to protect is culture. This is what it's based on. So we're all working together on one thing. You cannot put arts and culture as a secondary thing. This is I think a very important thing to understand. That is, it's, you know, the museums are not just there to 4 walls to house this collection. It's a museum. It's for all, and this is a treasure for humanity and for the country and so on. Yeah.
Thank you, Guyana. I will end with you if you want to add a final comment about what people here should understand about culture, and if you feel you've said it already, maybe just a quick summary.
Well, as I said earlier, I think culture is about accessibility, and I think what we have in Uzbekistan is really the biggest challenge, that culture is really accessible from very early stages. We were just discussing, you know, about the craft, that every family almost is practicing crafts, and I think that that's how it should be. You know, it should be family to family, and then the government just need to support it. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. We are actually the last session in this room, so I'm going to do a little bit of moderator's prerogative and see if there are questions. We will try to take them. Why don't you, I see 2 questions, we'll take those 2 questions if we have that, and then while you're just getting them sorted there, I'll just say that kind of obvious, which, you know, asking what is, we had these 2 hands up here first, right there, and you just walked right past the person, and right here, yeah, sure. I mean, I just go by who has their hands up. It's, you know, kind of sand to the desert to talk about how important culture is in Qatar, because this is certainly a country that understands that. Go ahead. Please introduce yourself quickly.
Okay, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Lina Darwish. I'm a graduate from Georgetown University in Qatar, and I want to thank all of the panelists and everyone attending for this very insightful session. All of your remarks have been very helpful because they come from all over the world. I want to think a little bit about preserving culture. So right now, we're looking at a lot of cultures, and I feel like, Mr. Khalid, you specifically talked about this in Sudan, and it's an excellent point. During the coup and the war, there's a lot that is being lost in culture that it cannot be preserved. You see that in Palestine as well every single day when you have, tens of thousands being killed. And you see that all over the world. So I wanted to ask you all, because you all play a very important role, in doing this. How do you preserve cultures in times of conflict, and what do you prioritize the most? Like, what is the most important thing in that moment? Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Who would like to take that? I think that's kind of for you, Irina.
Well, I did mention the example, of course, with Mali. I think what is very important, and that's why I did mention the Security Council resolution adopted in 2017, because I believe that until the events in Syria, Iraq, in Mali, some 10, 15 years ago, there was not at all political cognizance and recognition of the importance of these issues. It was considered that there are kind of a collateral damages, and it is happening. So on one side, we had to educate the politicians, the political class, the people that take these decisions in United Nations or in some other places. And on the other side also a broader, I would say, public opinion. And I do remember we had a lot of debate because, of course, all this happened against the background of a huge humanitarian crisis. You mentioned Gaza, it's the same. Gaza is destroyed, and Gaza is the entry, it's historic site. It is not just a place today of conflict, but Gaza had an extraordinary heritage, cultural heritage. And when this is destroyed, actually you destroy something that belongs to all of us, because our understanding about culture nowadays is very different than it used to be in the 20th century, somewhere beginning. The protection of heritage, it's a legal instrument, it's international law. It is not something that some well-wishers want to see happening. It's just international law. And the other, I would say, very important aspect is our understanding today that there is no pure culture. Nowhere, I would say nowhere, and in the history of humanity, there has been ever a pure culture. Cultures permeate each other. Go to any place, any cultural heritage site, you will see influences of this civilization, of the other, of this religion and the other. So I think this type of understanding, educating the public opinion, society and politicians, that this is not right, it should not happen, I think it's very important.
Thank you. We can take maybe one more question here, and then we can stay, I think, afterwards, because I do want to let people go if they need to go. Why don't we take this question and the woman in the back who had her hand up from the beginning, and we'll answer them together.
Just first.
Well, go ahead and ask your question. We'll do them together. We're multitaskers here.
Thank you so much. My name is Saif al-Islam Aid, and I'm a researcher at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. I have a small inquiry to Dr. Andrea. You talked about the culture of Germany with supporting or committing the Holocaust and before. Do you think that they abandoned this culture now by supporting the genocide going in Gaza for a year? Because Germany is, I think this is the highest position from the EU, supporting this ongoing genocide, and they have, unstoppable support of this state of terror of Israel so far. So, and they don't want to abandon that, they don't want to take it off. They don't want to stop it. However, I think most of the society there and most of the people there are against that, against this unstoppable support. So do you think this culture is still ongoing somehow in the blood of the culture there? Thank you.
Thank you. We're just going to try to take the one question at the back, and then we'll answer both. Just one, very quickly.
Hi, thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Ayu. I'm from Bali, Indonesia. And learning about what other countries are going through in order to be able to preserve the culture, I understand what truly is a privilege for us to be able to live it and to still have it on a daily basis. I have one question. Having such fame for culture does come with a challenge. Based on your experiences, what is the best way, the best practice to be able to balance cultural and heritage preservation with the chance of mass tourism, which can come with ruining actually the existence of the culture and the heritage sites that we have? Thank you.
Thank you. Two very different questions. Andreas, why don't you take the first one, and then we'll see maybe between Guyana and
Yeah,
Razi.
I even think the first one was addressed to me. The second one a bit less. I take your anger about Germany. Take it seriously. And what I said in the beginning perhaps might give you a hint. There is a self-contradiction in what Europe does consider as universalism. And just one remark, Europe considered looting of art as a war crime when? First time in 1906. This was not by pure other the moment in which the European powers got into an infight. Okay, we looted, in the times of imperialism, we looted art everywhere and we didn't care about it. It became an issue of international law in 1906, 1907, and then Irina spent some years in order to make that progress. So as a German, I experience that contradiction to my own values. I experience it in my flesh, in my thoughts, in what I'm doing from day to day. I do not think that you want to get into a political argument with me, knowing that I will not change the position of the German government, but that I will have to defend the position of the German government. So either, and that's a choice to be made between you and me, either we talk seriously between human beings, and I'm open to it, or you're just asking for the political statements I will have to issue because I'm a civil servant of the German government. And then I will issue all the political statements.
Yeah, I think you can continue that afterwards. Thank you. I'm going to turn to whoever would like to answer, but I'm thinking particularly of Guyana and Razi, the question from Bali, and thank you so much for asking it, about the challenges or the balance between cultural preservation and then the onslaught of mass tourism, which you've certainly experienced in Bali. I know I was just there. Neither of you has mass tourism yet. Is it something you think about?
Well, we actually have mass tourism, and this is why we're creating Bukhara Biennial, so abandoned mosque and madrasa can be turned into pavilions and not turned into the bazaars, you know. So we do have these challenges. But thank you so much for your question, and we actually just hosted a conference from Indonesia in October in Tashkent, the conference on creative economies that your government is doing almost every year. And it's been also a great source of inspiration how creative economy is developing in Indonesia. Well, we basically have this kind of the same debates in the country. We are preserving culture, of course, but this is why we create a lot of new projects and programs, you know, to preserve culture and not turn it into the market, kind of, you know, because we have, as I say, you know, we have a lot of craftsmanship, and of course there is a huge temptation to sell it to everyone, but we also have to keep the quality good. So I think creating the programs by government or private institutions is very important, you know, to work with this. Yeah.
Thank you. Did you want to add something, Razi? And then we'll end with that.
We might not have that much foreign tourism, but there's a lot of domestic tourism, especially in the mountains. And there is a fair share of foreign tourism up north as well, to the Himalayas and Karakorams. There is a small town called Chitral, which has not far from Chitral, about an hour's drive from there, is this village which is populated by the Kalash Valley from the Alexandrian times. They have certain customs, mores, and values which are markedly different from the rest of the country. Now, because of this exoticism, so many people from Punjab and the rest of Pakistan want to go there, and unfortunately, because of mass tourism, it's becoming more endangered. So we have to curb that phenomenon, and it's entirely because of that domestic tourism influx. How do we do that? I think certainly, like there's congestion pricing to control pollution, for instance, there has to be some mechanism to curtail the influx of tourists in such endangered ecosystems. And alongside working well with the communities to ensure that certain educative purpose is also rendered by bringing people, you also tell them of the certain significance that that community holds for the wider world. It's not just for Pakistan. These traditions are really part of the intangible heritage of our one world. So I think we all have to work together through multilateralism, through multiple bodies like the UNESCO, to ensure more harmonious flow between tourism and endangered crafts and communities.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all my panelists. You did a fantastic job, covered so many topics in just the right amount of time. So thank you so much, and thank you for being such an attentive audience.